So here we are in Ephesians chapter 2, and at the start, these first 1, 2, 3 verses, we're looking at the bad news before we hear the wonderful good news. And we're finding out why we really were, before we were in Christ, before we became Christians, why we were dead. And we saw two of the first two members of the unholy Trinity yesterday. We saw the fact that it was the world and the devil that we were in the grips of. So no wonder we were dead spiritually. And in case you're tempted to think, well, of course, you see, there's nothing we could have done about it. You see, I mean, it wasn't our fault. I mean, the world and all its wicked influences around us, and the devil, of course. I mean, the devil made me do this, the devil made me do that. We sometimes foolishly hear Christians say. Well, Paul reminds them of the third unholy member of the Trinity here in verse 3 of Ephesians chapter 2. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. Or the older versions say, we were objects of God's wrath. That's what we were. We were the very object of where God was going to pour all his wrath out on. Because we were dead, because we were lost, because we were enemies of God. And it wasn't just to do with the fact that because of the world that we lived in and its influences all around us, and not just because of the devil, and so we couldn't help it. It's the flesh. The third member. That's me. That's you. These are the three deadly enemies that keep us lost and blind and create in us a complete deadness spiritually. The world, the flesh and the devil. And our own flesh really is to answer for our sin. We're all accountable for our actions. But listen to how Paul described what we were like. We used to gratify the cravings of our flesh and follow its desires. There was a time, do you remember, before you became a Christian, when you did what you liked, when you liked, how you liked, with who you liked. And it didn't trouble you, nowhere near as much as it does now that you're a Christian. Because you lived to the flesh. You're enslaved by these sinful desires that we have within, that led us astray and kept us and took us far from God. But don't worry, good news tomorrow is on the way.